as I said to people, you have to understand, imagine getting into your 40s, building your career and your circle of friends that you have dinner parties with and you socialize with. And then in the space of 3 years, 40 of them are just wiped off the face of the earth. Now you tell me how you're going to behave. Because there's no manual for that, there's no book for that. But equally, the rest of the world doesn't know what's going on. The rest of the world is oblivious to you. Not only oblivious, they treat you as diseased pariahs.
It was a really sad story where he was a young gay boy who'd been born in that psychiatric hospital to a mother who had had like a leucotomy, like a lobotomy back in the 50s, who had sort of lived her life in this institution, and she was raped in the hospital, became pregnant. He was her child. She was mentally ill. He was mentally ill. It was just horrendous. And so my first contact of looking after somebody with HTLV3, is what we were calling it, was pretty awful. Like it was, we were scared of it. We were scared of him. He was scared of us. It was just a disaster. Like it was, I feel ashamed. I do. I'm upset, but I feel ashamed of how we treated him, because we barrier nursed him. He was treated, he was, he was pretty much treated like a leper. And he was a scared, young, frightened, ill kid. And the same, sort of the same age as me, maybe a bit younger than me. And he, we were all double gloved and double gowned, and he was kept in an isolation room. All of his cutlery was plastic, paper plates, even his notes had infectious written on them. We didn't touch them without gloves on. His bedding was burnt. It was just horrendous.
It was the beginning. The 80s was the beginning of disco. It was the beginning of people going out to places like Heaven. Heaven was the big nightclub. Soho was building up. There's a great sense of freedom. And it was really a few more years. It was into 86 and 87 before this kind of undercurrent of fear started to creep in.
Talking about emotions is difficult, but it's been the only way that I've been able to make sense of what we have lived through. Now it seems so long ago, and we've all got on with our lives, but it doesn't take into account just how many of us died.
One was a tall Italian glamorous man who came out of her side room at night time in a blue ball gown and 6-inch heels when 6-inch heels were hard to come by. And he swung around and he just looked so gorgeous, and then he started coughing up bits of his lung. And this blue gown with these dark, dark flecks on it, it was just so hard. It was just so painful, and you knew exactly what was happening.
It really was a way of life. It really was a way of life. It got to the point where you'd hear, so-and-so, he's gone, oh, well, really? And I thought, God, no emotion, it's just another person. In them days, it was people were just dropping like flies. And it did frighten me, because some of the illnesses didn't look too pretty, and it was how fast it could come on. We could be, you'd meet some good people in these sort of places. So when, for example, last week they'd invite you for dinner, we'd be there, and you're visiting someone in the Mould a week later and notice that they're in and they've died the next day, and then another. It was just.
And eventually it got to the point I went back in 86 and nobody in my New York address book was alive. Nobody.
Well, Robbie died on New Year's Eve of 97, so the end of 86, 87. He just escaped having to be buried in concrete. People had to be buried in concrete. I wasn't allowed to view the body.
Someone went in and did this exorcism, but I remember him saying to me, "Am I damned now?" Yeah, so he said to me. Yeah.
I know one person who can't get to sleep because she thinks it's going to get her when she's asleep, you know.
I remember going to a funeral for someone and worrying why someone hadn't come to talk to me or waved across the room or something. And so we go and talk to him afterwards, and it was clear his eyesight had gone.
Looking back on it, I was working full-time, I was under a lot of stress, I had 2 young children, I had a husband who had started taking hard drugs, started being violent, started, not being the perfect husband. And somehow, when I look back on it, I was managing, I was still turning up for work, still taking my kids to childminder. You know, it's amazing when you look back on these things, how it is. But things were not good and I was not healthy. But then I was under a considerable amount of stress, so I thought that it was stress related, you know.
Not immediately. No, not immediately. I mean, I continue to be myself. You know, I was kind of confident. I didn't put the HIV back to the back of my mind. And I kind of just like got on with life. And there's that resilience of youth, isn't it? When you're 17, 18, 19, you just continue going on. And I think it slowly chipped away, slowly touched different parts of me. But I was always bolshy. I was always mouthy and, you know, quite out there and, you know, really didn't give too much to people, you know. So that was part of my personality, to be resilient, to be quite confident anyway. But inside, slowly, it chipped away. Yeah.
I had one-on-one counseling. I remember one time I went to this counseling session and the counselor had disclosed to me, you know, through the sessions that he was also HIV positive, and we understood each other well. He was a very kind man. And one day I went to the session and there was somebody new. And I said, "What happened to my counselor?" And they told me he was dead. And that was also really incredibly stressful because he was well whenever we were in the sessions, and there was no indication that he was going downhill when we were in the sessions. So it shook me. I was very saddened by that.
Not only is it people with HIV who have this trauma, but it's people who haven't had HIV, but have also had to live alongside it, cheek by jowl, you know, wiping their lover's vomit up as he's dying. These people are also traumatized.
And KS was an awful disease then. We see so much less of it now, because my other memory is of a patient at the end of his life, and again nighttime, and perhaps so many of my memories are at nighttime because there are fewer distractions around and the telephone doesn't ring and all of that. And nobody wants to die alone, and he didn't want to die alone. And he was rocking himself on his bed, and his back was covered with KS, and he was in pain, and couldn't get comfortable, and he couldn't sleep. And I just sat there, just rubbing his back. Like, his back had become like a bird skeleton. It was tiny. And I just sat there rubbing him and rubbing his back. And eventually he kind of looked more relaxed. and he died during a day shift. And that kind of loneliness where I came in at such an awkward moment and yet it made a difference, that stayed with me too.
That's another thing. Why are we a group of people that couldn't share this terrible illness? Our sexuality, and now this illness came along. It was like we didn't have the normal right, like someone has, oh, you've got cancer, or I've got a brain tumor. It was like we had to, like, be ambiguous or tell untruths about it. We didn't want to, but we found we had to.
When HIV or whatever it was identified, and the group of people that were going to get it was identified, it was a moral dilemma for the world, for the politicians and the churches. It wasn't a medical problem. All the concentration went on, if you're going to lie in the gutter, then you'll get it, and it didn't really matter because you're gay, you're expendable. Who cares?
When I came out as gay, some sort of 9 years later, I was diagnosed with HIV. At that point, my father said he never wanted to see me or speak to me again, and he never did. He died about 3 years ago, and I never saw him again. From the age of 24, he never spoke to me again. In fact, I discovered after his death that his friends actually didn't know I existed.
From the moment the words, "You're HIV positive," was uttered, essentially in that moment to society, I had turned from a young, creative, gay guy to a monster.
There was no cure, there was no treatment that was effective really, and you prayed. I probably prayed, and I'm not a religious person.
Many of us were just like frozen in complete grief and fear, because we assumed at that time that this is what was to come for us, and it was what was to come for many, many of those men.
What I hadn't really taken into consideration was all of those years of positive thinking, stroke denial, and all of the things of taking all those actions to do the best I could for myself made it impossible for me to commit suicide when it came for things going wrong. And I was like, no, God damn it, I'm going to fight. And so when I got the KS, it was like, that was the point where I was afraid. And the first time that I really felt that, okay, this is it. This is AIDS.
A weird combination that something like the internet and the advent of a cure, near as damn it, you would have thought would have kept the family together and the little HIV society together, and it just blew it.
Because he's been dead 23 years, it's difficult to look back. 18 to 28 was 10 very significant years of my life. And I'm 51 now. Not a day in those years but I haven't thought of him. But how we were at the time, the tendency is to look back with sort of rose-tinted lenses and see it as being always happy. I know that we spoke to other people. I know that at that point we had a functioning community of positive people who supported each other in a way that we barely have now.
I think women still today don't think it's really anything to do with them. I don't think they even realise that half the world's population now, thereabouts, of infected people are women. I don't think people realise, I don't think anybody realises that. There are more and more women getting diagnosed now, so it's coming a little bit more into the media, but on the whole, it's still thought of as a gay man's disease.
Well, younger people
don't even know really what happened during the pandemic. They don't know that history. They know that lots of people died, but they don't know how they died, not really. They don't know how difficult it was for people.
All those people who died, paving the way now for excellent medication, a normal lifespan, being able to, have families and things like that. And I think it would be horrible to forget the 40 million people who've died of HIV already, because they have got us to the point where we are now, that we can live effectively with it on medication.
This is going to happen again. It might not be AIDS, it might not be HIV, but it will be something. And we need to grow as a society and as a world. We need to understand our history and embrace the knowledge that we get from it. Just in terms of how to treat each other, how to look after each other, how to understand the importance of being alive.
There are lots of people living into older age now who dismembered their lives the moment they were told they were HIV. They just wrecked the whole lot. They blew all their money. They drew down their pensions and waited to go out with a bang. And 20 years later, they're still here, except that they don't have their pensions and they don't have their employment. They might not even have their accommodation.
I am the first generation of people living with HIV. I'm 54. I never expected to live past my 26th birthday. I certainly didn't plan to get older. I certainly don't have provision for getting older. I don't know how the virus is going to impact my health as I get older. I don't know how HIV is going to impact the aging process as I get older, though I'm beginning to get a sense that it will, and that it is.
There is an interesting thing that I read that says that 50 years after your death, nobody will remember you. And here I think, but we're coming up to 25 years after certain people of life died, we're still talking about them, we're trying to tell their story to keep them alive. But one day, even her son will not be remembered because he didn't have children. When the parents died, who's there to remember her son? The world kind of shrinks in that kind of memory sense. And I think that's really poignant because they were all such important lives.
Yes, we may be able to live a almost normal lifespan, but not well. And if we just focus on not dying, that doesn't mean anything to us. Because the fact that, for instance, I'm not dead is, that's the place you start from. That's not the place you finish. All the other things that are well known as determinants of illness, which are primarily behavioral and mental and social issues, got swept to the side because that's not what physicians deal with. And now you see the consequences of it because we're struggling to create a response to things like aging, lack of employment, chronic disability and chronic welfare, and also things like chemsex in the younger generation. All these things that had we had an integrated response involving not just biomedical but behavioral medicine and social medicine all together, we would not be suffering from now. And that's what makes me angry.